It's a bit more, thank you, a bit more formal as a presentation and in content as well, you'll see. So just a little bit about myself. So I was an undergraduate student for 4 years here at the University of Glasgow. I studied history and politics. I'm currently doing a postgraduate in international relations. I've been a citizen of Flandrensis since 2016. I've been an active minister of the Grand Ducal Cabinet since 2019, as well as chief herald. So I'm responsible for all heraldic designs and everything related to orders of nobility and nobility in general in Flandrensis. And I'm also consul of Scotland for the micronation. Because we've heard some very sort of different things today. I just want to give a brief sort of overview of what micronationalism looks like today in the world. According to estimates by Professor Alistair Bonnet from the University of Newcastle and Professor Sandra Peterman from the University of Mainz, there are between 300 and 400 micronations around the world today. Most people only know the very famous ones like Sealand or Molossia. But there are many different types of micronations as well. Some are offshore platforms, others are villages or towns. You have, for example, in Italy, Seborga. In France, you have Aigues-Mortes, who are entire towns that are also micronations and have Aigues-Mortes, for example, has also its own currency that is in use, in everyday use by all the people who live in the town. And yes, so you have people whose micronation is just their house or their bedroom or a plot of land they own somewhere. The reason there are so many micronations is because most people prefer creating their own rather than joining an existing one. Usually it's more fun to sort of be in full control of the creative process of the micronation. But that's also why there are so many micronations every day that disappear, because when you're all alone in charge of your project, if you stop giving it your full attention, it sort of dies. So in this whole big worldwide micronational picture, Flandrensis is quite well known. We are recognized by over 200 micronations, which is a lot. Flandrensis is also unique in that it has been present or represented in some way in every single micronational summit or meeting or colloquium in the last 9 years, for the exception of one. And this is possible because there are sort of micronational meetings on all continents. And this is possible thanks to Flandrensis having citizens and representatives in many countries around the world. We have around 700 citizens at the moment. In comparison to Sealand and to Christiania, Flandrensis has a very boring sort of genesis. It was founded in 2008 by Niels, who is actually in the audience today as well. He created the micronation in 2008 when he graduated from university. He was bored during the summer holidays and just decided to spend 2 weeks doing it. But all his friends got really interested into it, which he didn't expect. And so the project took a life on its own, and all his friends wanted to become ministers and occupy positions and be active. And so Flandrensis has, from a 2-week project, has become a 12-year end-going sort of project. Flandrensis has evolved a lot over history over the last 12 years. Originally, it just started purely as a political simulation. So that means there were political parties, elections, a constitution that was respected and regularly reviewed. It was not role-playing, and I can't emphasize this enough, because it wasn't Dungeons and Dragons, people sitting around a table and pretending they were a wizard, and then, you know, you stand up and it's done. Here, all the people, everyone who occupies some sort of position in the government has actual responsibilities to keep the organization going, and every decision that is made has some repercussions. To this effect, Professor Alistair Bonnet, whom I mentioned earlier, said during an academic conference, which was not related at all to sort of macronationalism, but it's a topic that the professor studies. He mentioned Flandrensis and said that it was a very good example of micronation, where young people can experience with politics and sort of learn the weight of responsibilities and learn decision-making skills as well. And that is thanks to the fact that our Grand Duke, Niels, worked for local government in his town in Belgium. He was in charge of setting up meetings, and he completely copied the model of sort of town council in Belgium and applied it to the micronation. So all procedures, all institutions, everything was modeled on sort of a Belgian town council. And it has evolved over time, but we have still kept some of these elements today. In addition to political simulation, it's also a cultural organization. Originally, as Flandrensis was a project for Niels and his group of friends from school and from university, so that they would keep meeting even after they graduated. And so they did a lot of cultural events. There were championships, full championships, bowling championships, bake-offs, and all sorts of events. And basically the idea is any event they did as a group, they could frame under the umbrella of Flandrensis and sort of give it a twist, if you want. And it helped them stay as a group together as well as friends for much longer than they would have otherwise had they not all been part of this project they created. Since 2017, Flandrensis has really sort of taken on a different shape. Today it is officially recognized in Belgium as an unincorporated association with non-profit activity. So we are sort of a charity. It is an ecological movement, and it is known in the micronational community for its sort of being part of the ecological movement, being a pioneer in ecological micronationalism. We have 701 Flandrensians as of today. We have a counter on our website as well if you want, from 70 different nationalities, and we have 7 official consulates or embassies around the world. Flandrensis is invited at a lot of events all the time. Every 2-3 months we are somewhere around the world invited to speak on the topic of micronationalism, of political simulation, or of ecology. But what sets Flandrensis really apart from the 300 plus micronations around the world, and that's the fact that Flandrensis is the only country in the world that doesn't want its land inhabited by people. One of our official mottos is "No humans, only nature." And this really sets us apart from both all micronations and also from the macro-national community, that is to say the big states, because in that claim is really unique to our project. So it begs the question of where our territory is. Our territory is 5 small islands in West Antarctica, which you can see on the map here. The islands are the islands of Saipel, Carney, Meha, Cherry, and Prank. And we claim these 5 islands based on an interpretation of the Antarctic Treaty. So the treaty was signed in 1959, and it stipulates clearly that no nation on Earth has the right to claim land in Antarctica between the 90th and 150th degrees of latitude. However, it says no nation. And so what Niels did as a young graduate student, he claimed these islands in his private name. It's a loophole. And so he wrote an official letter to the UN. He wrote an official letter to the Antarctic Treaty Secretariat. And since we never received a reply, even though we insisted, we consider that no news is good news sort of thing. And so as long as they haven't told us that officially we're not allowed, we consider that we are in our legal right to claim these islands in a private name. Then Niels sort of donated these lands, which he claimed in his own name, to the Grand Duchy, to the micronation. And this is in fact very common in micronationalism, that people exploit loopholes or specific interpretations of existing treaties. You have a number of other micronations that claim territory in West Antarctica. You also have people who claim land on the moon, because the Moon Treaty, signed during the Cold War, also says that no nation is allowed to claim land, but nothing is said about individuals. You have people that claim to be continuations of extinct states, because no other state, sovereign state, ever claimed to be an official succession of that extinct state. Or you even have, for example, the case of Molossia, if we can hear it from Kevin Baugh later on himself. Molossia is still at war officially with East Germany, because East Germany was given an island off the coast of Cuba, and when East Germany was incorporated into West Germany, they never, in the treaty, they never included that island off the coast of Cuba. So technically, according to Molossia, East Germany still exists on that small island in Cuba, with which they are therefore at war. However, unlike Sealand, which we recognize has a lot of differences with our own project, with that we do, we don't really care about the fact that macro nations, the UN and big states, don't recognize us as a real country. We do use our claims of sovereignty, however, to ask existing international organizations, NGOs, and intergovernmental organizations to keep Antarctica clean, free of tourism, free of industrial exploration, and we hope that Antarctica one day can become a big marine protected area. We also hope that the terms of the Antarctic Treaty, which was signed in 1959 and expires in 2048, will be extended, because once the treaty expires in 2048, Antarctica, the entirety of it, will be open to industrial exploration, tourism, and colonialization by humans, by states. And so we want to prevent this, as Antarctica is the only continent on Earth that has suffered relatively less than all the others from human occupation, and that it has an existing ecosystem that is very fragile and that we want to preserve. As I said earlier, Flandrensis is a pioneer in the micronational community in ecological micronationalism. We have been at the origin of several agreements that have been signed with other micronations. So the very first ecological micronational treaty are the Alcatraz Accords in 2015. The biggest one at the moment is the Micronational Declaration on Ecological Stewardship, which we signed in 2017, but new micronations keep joining us. And to this day, I think we have 33 signatories. The ecological charter with Aigues-Mortes in France is also quite interesting, because Aigues-Mortes, so it is also a real French town. And at the same time, it's also a macronation, which sort of overlaps, the territory overlaps with that of the town. And they are at sea level in the south of France. And if Flandrensis in Antarctica melts, then Aigues-Mortes in France will be underwater, as so many other thousands of cities and towns in Europe and around the world, when sea water levels do rise. So this ecological charter was sort of very symbolic in that if Flandrensis disappears, Egmont as well, they will be flooded. All our inner policy as well as foreign policy is centered around these 4 ecological pillars, and I realize that it's missing an L. So these are to reduce energy consumption, reduce water consumption, recycle, and buy locally. We think that small actions can have big impacts, and we are very much about keeping things so local and reducing our footprint as much as we can. And we make this the center of all our interactions with macro national organizations, so big NGOs and intergovernmental organizations, as well as micronations. And these 4 principles also dictate our local politics, inner politics within Flandrensis. So there are just a couple of examples now of the type of activities that Flandrensis does. We take part, all our citizens take part in cleanup actions around the world. So we are during World Cleanup Day, every 20th of September, we will take the streets as well as hundreds of thousands of other people around the world and clean our streets. As you can see on the right, the World Cleanup Day, which is an officially recognized NGO, retweeted us last year. And this is our Grand Duke showing the example. We warmly recommend to all our citizens to take part in these actions. However, they are compulsory for members of the Grand Ducal Cabinet and of the Diplomatic Corps. We also take part in other activities. We like to work with local organizations whenever possible. This is an example of citizens in Italy who have helped a local NGO plant trees on an abandoned plot of land. The project was called Food Forest. So yes, we encourage our citizens as well to work as much as possible with local organizations and help their communities wherever they are. This is a project we started in 2017, climate letters. So there are 2 kinds of climate letters. First, there are those we send to, so all these letters are sent to actual governments and actual intergovernmental and organizations and NGOs. So part of these letters is where we thank governments and organizations for doing certain things for the environment and more specifically for Antarctica. A big majority of these letters, however, are reminders we sent to governments around the world, Brazil, China, the G6, etc., about whenever they breach any commitments they made regarding the environment, because I think a majority of countries at the moment have signed some sort of agreements, binding or not, relating to the environment. And we monitor this, and we regularly remind real countries of their obligations and of commitments they made. We also always ask in our letters the countries to extend the Antarctic Treaty beyond 2048 and support the establishment of a natural reserve in Antarctica. We have sent over nearly 100 letters at this point over the last 3 years. We've only received one reply, however, to these, which was from a sub-branch of the Antarctic Treaty Secretariat dealing with the waters of Antarctica, who thanked us and invited us to forwarded our letter to another part of the organization that was actually dealing with the issues we raised in our letter. Sort of this, in addition to helping communities, our local communities, and planting trees, cleaning the streets, we always also take part in protest actions. So on the left, there is one of our citizens in Modena, in Italy as well, who was part of a big protest in the city with hundreds of other people when the city council decided to uproot healthy young trees to build yet another parking when the city had actually just promised to reduce cars within the limits of the city. On the right is a poster which was designed by our minister and ambassador in India, Ritoban, which he designed on the occasion of Japan officially resuming whaling activities in Antarctic waters. This is our Grand Duke in London at the Embassy of Japan, where there was a protest 3 years ago now, I think, where there were thousands of people protesting in front of the embassy as well for against the resumption of whaling. So we try to be present at all these events around the world as well, whenever possible. This is our ambassador taking part in a climate march in Luxembourg in March 2020. I myself have also been taking part in climate marches in Glasgow whenever they happen, because we think it's important to help raise awareness for legislation to deal with environmental issues. As part of our 4 pillars, we also recommend our citizens, whenever possible, to grow their own vegetable garden, to have a compost whenever possible. Of course, for example, I live in Glasgow city centre, so I don't have a garden. However, I try and buy locally when my budget allows it. So I would go to Locavore, for example, and I use the city compost all the time. I do recycle as well. And these are all things we ask our citizens to do, which we also require of our partners, micronational partners around the world. And so here we just have sort of a propaganda photo, you could call, I suppose, of our Grand Duke, showing how he was creating his own vegetable garden. To go back to something the Prince of Sealand said earlier, micronationalism is, for some people, it's just a hobby. However, it is, in our opinion, also a lifestyle. It can take on sort of very big proportions, even though we recognize that we haven't shed as much blood, sweat, and tears as they did. We haven't been invaded yet. But at the same time, it is a very big commitment. We have an organization with 700 members who are all more or less active. And we try and be as active as we can. For our Grand Duke, in his own words, he said that for him it's still also a hobby because it's something he started to sort of fill his free time, and it's something he still spends a lot of time doing. But it's also sort of a cultural organization that has taken on another dimension. It's not just a hobby. Yes, and well, I think that's it actually for me. So we are present on Facebook and Twitter. We try to post things quite regularly, every few days. On YouTube, we are not that active, but we do have videos coming out now and then. We have a podcast as well, which comes out 2-3 times a year on SoundCloud. And I also invite you to visit our website. You will find our history, the model of our current sort of government in Flandrensis, activities we do, updates, or if you want to support us, our shop as well. And just the last thing to finish off, Kevin Baugh is taking part together with our Grand Duke next week in a micronational workshop, which is open and accessible to everyone if you want. They will be speaking about a lot of things, including how to start a micronation, how to get more citizens in your micronation, what micronational environmentalism is, etc. So if anyone is interested in starting their own micronation, I suppose that would be a good place to start. Okay, well, thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them.
You got quite a few questions actually during your talk.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how many of these are serious and how many of these are jokes, but
Just fire away. I'll see what I can do.
So the question about Marxist and Communist parties was already answered. The Grand Duke system, Rory asked about the Grand Duke system.
Yes.
Would you or Niels care to explain that a bit more, how the Grand Duke thing came about?
I think I can answer that one. Niels was a student of history. He graduated history, and so he had an interest in medieval Europe. That's where the name Flandrensis comes from as well. It's the name of the old medieval region of Flanders, today in Belgium. Yes, so it's sort of born out of history. Also, there are still some existing Grand Duchies in the world, such as Luxembourg. So it had sort of a basis in reality, and as well, it wasn't maybe as pretentious as king or emperor or the other titles some people use.
Okay. So Lachlan asks again another law question, because that is the theme
Yes.
of Lachlan's questions this evening. Is Flandrensis bound to the ECHR and Strasbourg decisions under Belgium, or do you have human rights legislation of your own?
So because officially, this is a tricky question, because officially Flandrensis is in Antarctica, which means that we are not related in any way to the EU or any of its laws. On the other hand, we're also an officially recognized organization in Belgium. So sort of these things are at the same time separate and sort of overlap. Our constitution is at the same time also the official document, our statutes at the same time in the eyes of Belgian law. So in that sense, we have to abide by Belgian law for all matters of discrimination, racism, etc. However, in addition to that, Flandrensis has its own parallel system, which is very identical, maybe even stronger. We have a very strong stance on respect, and we have a sort of proto-judicial system, if you like. And if someone misbehaves in Flandrensis, they will be facing trial, and they will have the right to a jury of their peers, which will be randomly selected within the population of Flandrensis.
Okay. Would you consider taking action if Flandrensis is invaded? Of course you would.
Yes, well, as I said earlier, Flandrensis doesn't want its land inhabited by people. We don't want any people in Flandrensis. So if someone comes and starts living on the West Antarctic ice shelf, where our islands are, we would, of course, protest. We wouldn't go there in person, because that would, again, go against our own principles, but we would do everything in our power, online and in person, sort of not in Antarctica, to oppose it.
Okay. Damon asks whether there are any members in New Zealand, because there's significant New Zealander claims on Antarctica.
I'm actually not aware of any citizens in New Zealand. I think maybe Neil should answer, can confirm. I don't think any New Zealand claims overlap with Flandrensis, for the reasons we mentioned earlier, that according to the Antarctic Treaty, which New Zealand signed, they are not allowed to claim any lands within the 90th and 150th degrees of latitude.
As much as I'd love to ask Rory's question, there's probably not going to be a real answer to whether flightless birds have a right to challenge governmental systems. So
no, but we have a population of penguins, which are very proud of, and the more the merrier, as long as it's not humans.
Okay, I guess the final question, because it's come up now twice, is how did the flag design come about? What was the inspiration?
Yes, so the flag design, if you want, I can sort of describe the history of it. So if you turn the flag 90 degrees to the left, you will see that it resembles a whole lot like the Belgian flag. It was turned to the side because that's how it was historically. And the reason we replaced the yellow in the flag by white is to symbolize the new beginning, so that it's simultaneously rooted in the history of the region of Flanders, but also sort of proper to us. And the coat of arms with the two lions are just also a symbol of medieval Flanders.
Okay. And finally, this will be the final question, because I am very anxious to speak to President Kevin, who's very patiently been waiting.
Yes.
Which historical Grand Duchy was the biggest influence in your model?
I think I'll have to let Niels answer that one. I'm afraid I'm not the right person.
Okay, no problem. Niels, are you doing that over text, or do you want to do that over voice?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so not actually a Grand Duchy, it was more inspired on the medieval history of Flanders. So the county of Flanders, as George explains, the micronation was original hobby for 2 weeks. So I'm not a monarchist, I'm not a royalist. Otherwise, I will choose for the Republic, but I searched something that was connected with medieval history. So I had a lot of kingdoms, duchies, principalities, empires. So I thought, okay, why not a Grand Duchy? So there's a lot of medieval elements from Flanders integrated inside the concept of Flandrensis.
Okay, well, that's been lovely. Thank you so much to the representatives from Flandrensis for coming in and speaking with us. Very interesting micronation and project that they're running.
Thank you very much for having us as well.
No worries. Any time. We're always happy to discuss environmental issues at GUPS. And finally, I guess